My name is Rachel. I'm 34 years old. Single. And I live in a quiet part of New Jersey, with my cat and a small herb garden I'm oddly proud of. I work in logistics. Manage a regional team. Pay my bills on time. And on paper, I've got it all together. But if you asked my family, they'd probably say I'm missing something essential. Like a husband, 2 kids, and an endless desire to put others before myself. I was raised in a home where being a good daughter meant you followed a very specific script. You smiled at the right time, said yes when it was expected, and always prioritized the family. I remember being told that women bloom through sacrifice, that our lives weren't truly complete until we'd fed, cleaned, and raised someone else's. My mother had this phrase she repeated like a lullaby. A woman without a ring is like a house without a roof. I used to stare at her while she said it, wondering why I didn't feel incomplete. Was something broken in me? The truth is, I never saw myself in the life they wanted for me. I didn't dream of white dresses or baby showers. I dreamed of making my own money, having a space that was quiet and mine, learning how to install a shelf without calling someone else to do it. But no matter what I achieved, it never seemed to count for much back home. At every family gathering, my cousins were asked about their kids, their husbands, their in-laws. I was asked if I was seeing anyone yet. When I said no, my aunt once tilted her head and said, "Maybe you're just too independent for your own good." I smiled. I always smiled. Over time, I started realizing that I wasn't being seen. I was being measured. My value was a checklist I didn't want to fill out. And while I kept playing the part, a quiet resentment started building up. Like dust in corners, no one bothers to sweep. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just played along. If I'd married someone I didn't love? Had children just to earn a seat at the family table? But then I look at my life, the peace I've fought for, the space I've carved, and I know I wouldn't trade it. Not for anyone. Not even them. Emily was always the golden one. From the time we were little, she had this way of shining that made people want to stand a little closer. Like maybe some of it would rub off. She was the one who smiled the brightest in family photos. The one who won homecoming queen. And later, the one who got married with flowers falling from the sky in a vineyard my parents couldn't afford but paid for anyway. They never said it out loud. But it was clear. Emily wasn't just their daughter. She was their hope. The walking proof that they'd raised someone worthy. Someone who made all their sacrifices worthwhile. I used to think maybe I was imagining it. The way conversations would tilt toward her even when I was the one speaking. But then it happened too many times to ignore, like when I got accepted into the executive development program at my company. The same week, Emily posted baby bump photos online. I told my mom the news. And she said, "Oh, sweetie, that's great. But did you see Emily's latest ultrasound twins?" I wanted to believe they cared. Just in a quieter way. That maybe they just didn't understand what my world looked like. With its spreadsheets and market forecasts and internal reviews. But then I made it onto a list. Top women in logistics under 35. They featured me on the homepage of the company's national site. My dad saw it on his phone and handed it back to me without even reading the headline. He just said, "Still no wedding ring." Huh? It sounds petty. I know. It sounds like I'm keeping score. And maybe I am. But when you've spent your whole life being measured against someone else, it becomes hard not to notice who gets praised and who gets passed over. There were Thanksgivings where my mom would print a dozen photo cards of Emily's family and tape them all over the dining room wall. Like some kind of shrine. One year, she even had mugs made with the twins' faces on them. I was 29 that year. Had just led the most successful quarter in my department's history. No mug for that. At Emily's baby shower, my aunt introduced me to a neighbor as the older sister. Then she leaned closer and added, "The quiet one. Never married. But she's very nice." I remember holding my plate of fruit salad and wondering why being nice always came with that tone. like it was a consolation prize. Sometimes I asked myself if I was being unfair. If maybe I had missed my own chances to be celebrated. If I had smiled more, shared more, chosen different shoes or a different voice. But deep down, I knew it wasn't about what I did. It was about who I wasn't. I wasn't the daughter who needed help picking a dress for prom. I wasn't the daughter who cried on the phone after her first breakup. I wasn't the daughter who made them feel useful. I was just functioning, paying rent, booking my own oil changes, setting reminders for my dental appointments. Not messy, not dramatic, just invisible. And yet, I loved Emily. I really did. Despite the lopsided attention, despite the way she rarely asked about my life unless it involved something she could post about. She was still my sister. The one I used to braid hair with in the summer. The one I made snow forts with when we were kids. I wanted her to be happy. I just didn't expect that her happiness would always come at the cost of mine. What I didn't realize back then was that my role in the family wasn't just to stay quiet. It was to hold steady. To absorb the imbalance without breaking. I didn't even recognize how heavy that had become until things finally started to crack. And when they did, I wasn't ready. I was still playing the part I thought I was supposed to play. Still trying to be grateful for a seat at a table I was never truly invited to. It started with my phone buzzing during a quarterly planning meeting. I ignored the first call. Then the second. Then noticed there were 6 more. All from my mom. There were 2 from Emily. One from a number I didn't recognize. And a single text from my dad that said, "Call home now." Something about that message made my stomach twist. My dad isn't the texting type. And he never gets involved unless it's serious. I excused myself from the call, stepped out into the hallway, and dialed home with my heart beating loud in my ears. My mother answered, already crying. Her voice was frantic, scattered, like she couldn't decide where to begin. Emily had walked out of her office early and found her husband kissing a woman in the parking lot. A coworker. Someone he'd apparently been seeing for months. He didn't deny it. Didn't cry or beg or explain. He just drove off, packed a bag that night and left. No message. No warning. Just silence. I stood there, holding my phone, listening to my mom talk through tears and blame. Emily wasn't speaking. She had locked herself in the bedroom with the kids and refused to eat. The boys were confused. One kept asking if their dad was on a work trip. The other had a meltdown when Emily forgot to pack a snack for school. They didn't know what to do. And even though I wasn't asked directly, I already knew what came next. I asked where she was staying. My mom gave me an address to an apartment in a dull part of town. Nothing like the house they'd shared. I remember the drive. Cold. Quiet. Like the day was holding its breath. I didn't know what I'd say. I hadn't spoken to Emily beyond polite small talk in months. But something in me just moved. Not out of duty. Not even guilt. It was like muscle memory. Like jumping in after someone before asking how deep the water was. She opened the door slowly. Eyes swollen. Hair a mess. Wearing the same hoodie she'd had since college. The place smelled like cardboard and takeout. The boys were napping. She looked at me and didn't say anything. I didn't either. I stepped inside, closed the door behind me, and started tidying up without being asked. I threw out a bag of half-eaten fries. I cleared space on the table so we could sit. I didn't bring flowers or some warm speech. I just showed up. Because that's what I'd always done. Even when no one noticed. That night, I took the boys to the park so she could shower. I picked up a few groceries on my way back. I fixed the broken towel hook in the bathroom and folded laundry while she sat by the window staring out like the world had stopped. She didn't ask me to stay. But I did. And the next night, too. And the next. She didn't thank me. Not once. But I told myself she was in shock. That this wasn't the moment for gratitude. That I wasn't there for validation anyway. But some part of me still hoped she'd see it. That maybe, just maybe, this would be the beginning of something different between us. A real sisterhood. A new start. I didn't know it yet, but that hope would be the thing to hurt the most. After that first night at Emily's apartment, I realized the road ahead wasn't going to be easy. I took on bills I never thought I'd touch, paying for a divorce lawyer, sorting out Emily's taxes, and covering rent that she couldn't keep up with. There were nights I stayed up late, scrolling through spreadsheets, trying to make sure every cent stretched as far as it could for her and the boys. I cooked dinners when she couldn't bring herself to stand in the kitchen. I helped the boys with their homework, patiently repeating the same math problems until they understood. I sang lullabies to calm the little one when he woke up crying. These were the quiet moments no one saw. Moments I hoped someone would one day acknowledge. But gratitude was a language Emily never spoke. Not a thank you. Not a look of appreciation. Sometimes she just sat by the window, eyes empty. And I knew the weight she carried was too much for words. Still, I held on to a fragile hope that maybe this sacrifice would mend the distance between us. I never asked for recognition or praise. Yet every unspoken thank you felt like a thread pulling at my heart. I told myself it wasn't about thanks. That family meant showing up even when it wasn't easy. But deep down, I longed to feel seen, to matter. I heard stories of my own achievements filtered through family gossip, often dismissed or overshadowed by news of Emily's latest PTA event or the boys' soccer games. My successes in the corporate world were met with shrugs or polite nods. Meanwhile, my own life felt invisible in a family spotlight that never shone on me. Still, I kept giving, because the boys were my family too. And I wanted them to know someone cared. I wanted to be the person who stood when the rest of the world seemed to sit out. I was tired. Yes. But I couldn't stop. Sometimes, late at night, I'd wonder if this was what being a good sister was supposed to look like, being the invisible backbone, carrying weight that no one acknowledged. It was a lonely kind of love. Quiet but relentless. And I didn't know then how much it was costing me until the moment I finally said enough. I remember the day they called me home like it was yesterday. The house felt too quiet when I walked in. But the smiles were all there, my parents, Emily, even some relatives I hadn't seen in years. They acted like it was a celebration. But the tension beneath the surface was thick enough to cut through the metal. My dad slid a thick folder across the coffee table toward me. Inside were mortgage documents for a house. I didn't know they'd bought one that Emily had supposedly chosen for her and the boys. Then came the ask. Framed like a favor, but feeling more like a demand, they wanted me to pay off the rest of the loan. The reason was clear. Since I was single, financially stable, and hadn't started a family yet, I was the obvious choice. My mother said it was only fair. I was the one without burdens. The one who could help without complaint. I sat there stunned, trying to process what I was hearing. Every bitter comment from years past came rushing back, the comparisons, the silent dismissals, the little jabs disguised as concern. How could they expect me to shoulder a debt I never agreed to? For a house they'd already bought behind my back, I wanted to speak, to say no. But the words caught in my throat. I swallowed hard and laid the folder down slowly. More to steady myself than to show refusal. Their smiles didn't waver. But I felt like a stranger in my own family. That moment was the first time I realized this wasn't just about money. It was about control. About expecting me to sacrifice my own life so theirs could appear perfect. And I knew, deep inside, this was a line I couldn't cross without losing myself. I left that meeting feeling hollow and angry. For the first time, I saw the family I thought I knew for what it really was, a web of expectations and unspoken rules that never included me. But unlike before, I wasn't willing to stay trapped inside it anymore. That night, I finally found the courage to say no. My mother's voice was soft but firm, reminding me of all the years they had raised me. How now it was my turn to give back. She spoke as if it was a debt I owed, a moral obligation I could not refuse. but I knew in my heart that this wasn't a favor or a family matter. It was an expectation I never agreed to. A burden that wasn't mine to carry. I told them quietly, but clearly, that I had helped for a year, and that was enough. There was silence after my words. No arguments. No pleading. Just the heavy weight of something broken between us. I stood up. My hands clenched tightly at my sides. And walked out without another word. Driving away. My throat was dry and my heart raced like it was running a marathon. For the first time, I wasn't playing the role they had scripted for me. I was standing on my own. And it felt terrifying and strangely freeing all at once. It wasn't a victory. Not yet. It was just the start of a fight I never wanted to have. But I knew deep down that if I didn't take this step, I would lose myself completely. This was my first no. And I hoped it wouldn't be my last. One afternoon, a thick envelope arrived at my doorstep from a law office I'd never heard of. My hands trembled as I tore it open, finding legal documents that named me as the defendant in a lawsuit filed by my own parents. They were demanding nearly $300,000 money they claimed I owed for the cost of raising me over 18 years. At first, I couldn't believe it was real. It felt like a cruel joke or some nightmare I'd wake up from. How could the people who gave me life suddenly turn their backs and put a price tag on it? The shock was overwhelming. A cold wave that washed away all my strength. I sat down, overwhelmed and alone. The papers slipping from my fingers as tears welled up. The list of expenses was detailed: medical bills, food, education costs, emotional care, everything tallied like a debt I was supposed to repay. It was like being charged for existing. But somewhere beneath the despair, anger started to burn. How dare they treat family like a transaction? How dare they erase all the sacrifices I'd made for them and for Emily? The pain mixed with fury sparked a resolve I didn't know I had. I reached out to Miranda, a lawyer I had met at a seminar once. When I explained the situation, she didn't blink. She promised to help me fight back, to show them that love and family were not ledgers to balance. And just like that, my fight was no longer silent. It had become real. I spent weeks gathering every piece of evidence I could find. Bank statements, emails, receipts showing the money I had sent to my parents and to Emily for their bills. I printed out records of the tuition I paid for the boys' preschool and the invoices for the divorce lawyer I covered. Each document was a silent testament to the support I had quietly provided. The day of the court hearing arrived, and I sat beside Miranda, dressed in my sharpest suit, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. Across the room, my parents sat stiffly with Emily, flanked by relatives who watched with barely concealed judgment. The judge was serious, his gaze cutting straight to the heart of the matter. Miranda presented our case calmly, laying out how I had been financially independent since I turned 18 and had, in fact, I've been supporting the very people now suing me. She handed over evidence that showed my consistent help, and the judge flipped through the papers with a cold, unreadable expression. Then, after what felt like hours, he delivered the verdict. He dismissed the lawsuit entirely, calling it unreasonable and an emotional manipulation. He said there was no legal basis for demanding reimbursement from an adult child for expenses incurred while raising them. Relief washed over me like a wave crashing on shore. When asked if I wanted to countersue, I shook my head. I just wanted peace. To close this painful chapter and move forward. Walking out of that courtroom, the weight I'd been carrying felt lighter. I didn't owe anyone anything but myself. The day I finally got the keys to my new house was quiet and unremarkable in every way. Yet it felt like the most important moment of my life. The sunlight streamed through the large windows, casting warm patterns across the wooden floorboards that I had chosen myself. It wasn't a mansion or a showpiece. Just a modest 3-bedroom home with a small backyard and enough space for me to breathe. I spent the first evening unpacking slowly, arranging the furniture with care, and hanging up a painting I had done years ago, a sunrise seen from my old apartment window. The scent of fresh paint still lingered, mingling with the faint aroma of lavender plants, I placed near the kitchen window. A small gift from my grandparents. I planted some tomato seedlings in the garden, feeling the soil crumble gently between my fingers. A simple act that made me feel alive and rooted. There was no party. No congratulations from family or friends. No balloons. No flowers waiting on the porch. But sitting on the floor in the quiet of that empty room, I felt a deep and unexpected sense of peace. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living for anyone else's approval or expectations. This was my space, shaped by my choices and my hard work. No one could knock on the door and demand I be someone I was not. Each day that passed, I found small joys in routines I had ignored before cooking new recipes, watering my plants, reading books I'd set aside. I even named the stray cat that kept coming around Jasper. And he quickly made the porch his kingdom. Though the house was silent, it spoke to me in ways words never could. It told me that this was a fresh start, that I could finally live on my own terms. And that was enough. One afternoon, a small envelope slipped through my mail slot. Inside was a crayon, drawing a simple house with 3 smiling figures on the roof, and the words Auntie Rachel's house scrawled across the top. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from my nephew. A child caught in the middle of a family I no longer belonged to. Alongside the drawing was a letter written in my mother's handwriting. She was asking me to open my home to Emily and the boys, explaining how they were struggling and needed a place to stay. The letter was careful and polite, but carried the same old weight, a subtle demand wrapped in the language of family duty. I sat down with the drawing in one hand and the letter in the other, feeling a mix of sadness and resolve wash over me. This was no longer about helping or caring, it was about control and manipulation. Using a child's innocence to pressure me into giving more than I could or would. I typed out a response that was clear and firm. I reminded them that the house was bought entirely with my own money, a sanctuary I had fought for through years of hard work. I told them that I would not be opening my door to anyone who had used me as a bank or weaponized family ties against me. I warned them that if the pressure continued, I would take legal action to protect my peace. It was the hardest email I ever wrote, but also the most necessary. Sometimes love means setting boundaries that others may not understand. I didn't want to burn bridges, but I knew some bridges lead only to more pain. This was my home, my life, and my choice. And for once, I was putting myself first without apology. On one quiet afternoon, my grandparents drove up from Salem and parked their old car in front of my house. Grandpa stepped out carrying a small pot of lavender and told me to keep it near the kitchen window. He said that lavender helps you breathe a little easier each morning, and that it holds grudges less than people do. Grandma arrived with a box of homemade apple pie, still warm and fragrant from the oven. They didn't ask about the lawsuit, the house, or the family drama. They just sat with me in the living room, quietly listening as I shared pieces of my story, not rushing me or offering advice. Their presence was a balm I didn't realize I needed. There was no judgment, no expectations, just a steady kindness that filled the space between us. Sometimes, I realized, love doesn't need to be loud or demanding. It doesn't need grand gestures or strings attached. It can simply be the act of sitting beside someone who's been through a storm and saying nothing at all. That kind of quiet acceptance was the first real comfort I had felt in years. It reminded me that family isn't always about blood, but about who lets you be yourself without explanation or condition. I looked around my home at the little signs of my new life, the lavender by the window, the worn pages of books I had started again, the small garden I tended with care. In that moment, I understood that healing isn't always about fixing what's broken. Sometimes, it's about finding peace in what remains and nurturing it gently. Their visits became a steady rhythm in my weeks, a reminder that I wasn't as alone as I sometimes thought. The love they gave was quiet but powerful, and it helped me believe I could finally build a family on my own terms. Looking back on everything I've been through, I realized that choosing myself wasn't easy. It meant breaking old patterns, saying no to people I loved, and standing firm even when it felt like I was losing everything. But in doing so, I found a peace I never knew I deserved. Have you ever faced a moment where you had to choose between what others expected of you and what you needed for yourself? Maybe it was a family demand, a relationship, or a long-held belief that no longer fit. I want to hear your stories because none of us are alone in this struggle. If you've ever felt invisible, pushed aside, or pressured to be someone you're not, please share your experience in the comments. Your voice matters, and your story could be the encouragement someone else needs today. Thank you for listening to mine. And remember, it's okay to put yourself first.